From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The whole world saw what happened to my daughter, and I call for international protection. Where is this international protection? Where are the human rights? How was my daughter a threat? What was her weapon?
Witnesses say Israeli soldiers shot dead 21-year-old Palestinian medic Razan al-Najjar as she ran toward the border fence to provide medical aid to a wounded protester. Since nonviolent protests began at the end of the march, Israeli soldiers have killed at least 119 people, including 14 children. More than 13,000 have been wounded. We'll go to Gaza City to speak with Dr. Medhat Abbas, director of Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip. And we'll go to Turkey to speak with Najjar's cousin, Dalia al-Najjar. Then, as a record 42 women run for Senate and victories for female candidates in Democratic primary races have become a trend, some predict 2018 will be a big year for the election of Democratic women. We'll look at the race for governor in Georgia, where former Democratic House Leader Stacey Abrams made history when she became the first African-American woman to win a major party's nomination for governor in the United States.
We are writing the next chapter of Georgia's future, where no one is unseen, no one is unheard, and no one is uninspired. We are writing a history of a Georgia where we prosper together.
If Abrams wins in November, she'll become the first African-American governor in the Deep South since Reconstruction. We'll speak with her about her primary victory, her campaign plans, and her book that offers advice to others inspired to take action. It's called Minority Leader: How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, thousands of Palestinians gathered Saturday for the funeral of 21-year-old medic Razan al-Najjar, who an Israeli sniper shot dead Friday as she was helping evacuate wounded Palestinians at a protest near the separation fence between Israel and Gaza. The Israeli sniper shot her in the chest, even though she was clearly wearing a medical vest and a medical ID at the time of her death. In total, the Israeli military has killed at least 119 Palestinians and wounded more than 13,000 more as part of a brutal crackdown against Palestinians' ongoing nonviolent Great March of Return protests demanding end to the Israeli occupation. This is Razan's mother, Sabrina al-Najjar.
The whole world saw what happened to my daughter, and I call for international protection. Where is this international protection? Where are the human rights? How was my daughter a threat? What was her weapon? This is her weapon, this medical equipment. This is my daughter's weapon. This is what she was resisting with. On what basis did the soldier kill her? She's been targeted since the first day of protest. So many times. She has survived death. She would come through and tell me what she went through. May God account every person who is silent about this.
Headlines will speak with Razan's cousin Dalia, and we'll go to Gaza to speak with Mr. Medhat Abbas, the director of the Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest in the Gaza Strip. President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, claims Sunday Trump has the power to pardon himself.
It's not going to happen. So it's a hypothetical point. I think the presidential power, there's nothing that limits the presidential power of pardon from a federal crime, not a state crime. President Trump is not going to do that. He's obviously not going to give up any of his pardon powers or any other future president's pardon powers. But under these circumstances, he's not going to do that.
Giuliani made the claims only one day after the New York Times published a 20-page letter written by Trump's lawyers to special counsel Robert Mueller, in which his lawyers claimed Trump is above the law, thus cannot have illegally obstructed the Mueller investigation. In the January 29th letter, they claim it remains our position that the president's actions here, by virtue of his position as the chief law enforcement officer, could neither constitutionally nor legally constitute obstruction, because that would amount to him obstructing himself, and that he could, if he wished, terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon if he so desired, unquote. In North Korea, 3 top military officials have reportedly been removed from their posts amid preparations for the proposed June 12th summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. In a reversal, President Trump announced Friday he would hold the summit after canceling the proposed meeting only a week earlier. In Guatemala, at least 25 people have died after the Fuego volcano erupted about 25 miles southwest of the capital, Guatemala City. Hundreds more were injured when lava poured down the mountainside and engulfed nearby villages. The Guatemalan president, Jimmy Morales, has declared 3 days of national mourning. In Jordan, thousands of protesters took to the streets of the capital Amman for a 4th straight night Sunday, amidst a growing anti-austerity movement sparked by an income tax increase backed by the International Monetary Fund. The protests are the biggest in Jordan. Al Jazeera reports Jordan's King Abdullah II is expected to ask for Prime Minister Hani al-Mulki's resignation today, the biggest protest in Jordan in years. This is Yasmin Miyar, one of the protesters.
To be honest, the citizens cannot handle the economic burdens. Who was bearing it previously? We are not the people who should pay the taxes of the IMF and the debts the country is putting onto the shoulders of the people. As you can see, people are protesting and are opposing these decisions.
Tunisia's defense ministry says at least 46 refugees died when their boat sank off Tunisia's coast Sunday. The refugees were from Tunisia and other African nations headed towards Sicily. The United Nations says at least 660 refugees have died crossing the Mediterranean so far this year. In Nicaragua, at least 6 people were killed over the weekend amidst escalating anti-government protests that have engulfed Nicaragua since mid-April. More than 110 people in the protests so far, of them killed, the majority killed by security forces or paramilitary groups loyal to Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega. On Sunday, Pope Francis prayed for peace in Nicaragua.
I join my brother bishops of Nicaragua in expressing sorrow for the serious violence carried out by armed groups to suppress social protests which have caused dead and wounded. I pray for the victims and their families. The Church is always for dialogue, but this requires an active commitment to respect freedom and, above all, life. I pray so that all violence could cease and so the conditions for the resumption of dialogue could be found as soon as possible.
In Puerto Rico, residents lined up hundreds of pairs of shoes outside the Capitol building in San Juan Friday as a memorial to those who died after Hurricane Maria. The action came after a stunning study by Harvard researchers revealed the storm's death toll is at least 4,645 people, 70 times higher than the official count. This is Neda Morales-Perez speaking at the vigil.
I'm here because my sister died. My sister is part of the statistics. She got in an accident and they couldn't operate on her in time. She was in the emergency room in the trauma unit, and she was in the intensive care unit for 51 days, until she died on December 21st, 2017.
In Texas, Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley was barred from entering a detention center for immigrant children in Brownsville Sunday after traveling to the center, housed inside an old Walmart, to see firsthand the Trump administration's practice of separating immigrant children from their parents. Federal authorities reportedly separated at least 600 immigrant children from their parents last month, sparking outrage and international condemnation. Meanwhile, in more immigration news, Houston authorities say there was a 16% drop in reports of domestic violence from the Latino community last year. Community advocates are concerned women are not reporting domestic violence out of fear of deportation. And in Denver, Colorado, an off-duty FBI agent shot and wounded a man at a bar after the agent did a backflip in the middle of the dance floor, causing his gun to fall out of his holster and fire accidentally. And in New York City, hundreds of sex workers and their allies rallied outside the Stonewall National Monument Saturday and marched to Washington Square Park to demand protections for sex workers on International Whores Day. This is Dominique.
Let me make this abundantly clear. Sex work is work. Woo! Thank you. It is labor. It is a solution more accessible than many others. It provides immediate income to its workers across a multitude of genders, races, nationalities, and abilities. When other doors are shut, sex work work is open. Keep the door of internet sex work open, of safer sex work open, of consensual sex work open. Let us work. Let us live.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today in Gaza, where thousands attended a funeral Saturday for 21-year-old Palestinian volunteer medic Ghassan al-Najjar. Witnesses say she was shot dead Friday by Israeli soldiers as she ran toward the border fence to provide medical aid to a wounded protester. This is a description of the attack from James Heenan, head of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Quote, reports indicate Ghassan was assisting injured demonstrators and wearing her first responder clothing, clearly distinguishing her as a healthcare worker even from a distance. Reports suggest she was shot about 100 meters from the fence. Under international human rights law, which applies in this context along with international humanitarian law, lethal force may only be used as a last resort and when there is an imminent threat of death or serious injury. It is very difficult to see how Ghassan posed such a threat to heavily armed, well-protected Israeli forces in defensive positions on the other side of the fence, Heenan said. Najjar was taken to a hospital where she died from her injuries. Her mother held her daughter's blood-stained medical vest as she spoke with reporters and demanded justice.
The whole world saw what happened to my daughter, and I call for international protection. Where is this international protection? Where are the human rights? How was my daughter a threat? What was her weapon? This is her weapon, this medical equipment. This is my daughter's weapon. This is what she was resisting with. On what basis did the soldier kill her? She's been targeted since the first day of protest. So many times. She has survived death. She would come through and tell me what she went through. May God account every person who is silent about this.
In total, the Israeli military has killed at least 119 Palestinians, wounded more than 13,000 more as part of the brutal crackdown against the Palestinians' ongoing nonviolent Great March of Return protest demanding an end to the Israeli occupation. The Israeli military says its troops worked, quote, in accordance with standard operating procedures, unquote, but said Saturday it would investigate her death. A volunteer ambulance worker told the Associated Press he and Najjar were planning to announce their engagement at the end of Ramadan. Meanwhile, Friday, the United States vetoed a UN Security Council resolution that would have condemned Israel's, quote, excessive, disproportionate, and indiscriminate force, unquote, against Palestinians. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said the resolution was one-sided. On Sunday, Israeli air forces fired at Hamas sites in Gaza after they said militants fired rockets at Israel. Also Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted he'd reduce the tax funds shared with Palestinians in order to compensate Israelis living near the Gaza Strip who say their property was damaged by fires caused by kites rigged with incendiary devices or attached to burning rags. Well, in a minute, we'll go to Gaza, but first we want to turn to Ghassan al-Najjar in her own words. This is an excerpt from her interview with the New York Times when she said Gaza needed more female medics like herself.
Being a medic is not only a job for a man, it's for women, too. Sometimes the injured are women. Who will treat them? Yes, a man can, but we have a big role here. We have one goal, to save lives and evacuate people, and to send a message to the world. Without weapons, we can do anything. This is the tent where the volunteers work daily. We volunteer here every day. We do this for our love of the country. It's humanitarian work. We don't do it for money. We do it for God. We don't want to get paid or be employed. People ask my dad what I'm doing here, and without getting a salary, he tells them, I'm proud of my daughter. She provides care to the children of our country. And especially because in our society, women are often judged, but society has to accept us. If they don't want to accept us by choice, they will be forced to accept us, because we have more strength than any man. The strength that I showed as a first responder on the first day of the protests, I dare you to find it in anyone else.
For more, we go now to Gaza City, where we're joined by Dr. Medat Abbas, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip. Also joining us from Istanbul, Turkey, is Dalia Al-Najjar, Razan's cousin. She's co-founder of Zyla Water, an organization dedicated to making clean water accessible around the world. She works with everyone from Massachusetts Institute of Technology to Lahore University. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Dalia, let's go to you first in Istanbul. Razan was your cousin. Can you talk about what we just heard, Razan describing what she felt was her obligation to be a paramedic, and who she was?
Thank you. Razan was a very strong-minded girl since she was very young. She always had dreams. She loved life. She was a source of positivity all the time. And being a nurse was one of her dreams. She worked hard to be one. She couldn't get a degree in nursing, unfortunately, because of the financial situations her family were living under. And then she went and got a training in nursing for 2 years. And she worked as a volunteer for 2 years without being paid. And then she felt it's her duty to be a first responder, because it's everyone's duty. Everyone has a role in what's going on, and she felt that she can do what she's best at by being a first responder. She was one of the first female first responders, and she inspired many people. I heard stories from her colleagues saying that other first responders used to motivate each other by mentioning her and talking about her. If anyone is sitting, they would tell him, "Come on." Razan broke her wrist, and yet she completed her shift. So she's a source of inspiration for everyone.
I want to go back to Razan Al-Najjar in her own words, talking about her life as a volunteer field medic in Gaza. She was speaking to TRT World weeks before she was shot and killed by Israeli forces Friday.
With all pride, I want to continue helping others till the last day. I'm paramedic Razan Al-Najjar. I'm 20 years old, working here as a field paramedic. The first day was the hardest for me. I suffocated from tear gas 3 times. The entire medical team was targeted. A colleague was shot in the back, and my friend, a nurse, was shot in the hand, and another colleague was shot near the ear. We gave them first aid in the field, and then we continued our work. We sent them to the hospitals and carried on in our work. Today, I was almost shot, but thanks for God's mercy. I was safe, and also yesterday I was suffocated from the tear gas. I fainted for about an hour. I woke up in an ambulance and I left it. I went crazy because I wanted to continue my work and my journey. I came to give care, not to get care. With all pride, I want to continue to the last day.
That, again, was Razan Al-Najjar's speaking. She was killed on Friday by an Israeli military sniper. Dalia, Razan's mother said, "I wish I could have seen her in her white wedding dress, not her shroud." She was about to get engaged after Ramadan?
Yes, true. One of her colleagues, medics as well, was interested in her, and they were to call their engagement after Ramadan.
You spoke to Razan's mother on Sunday night. Can you tell us about your conversation and what she said to you, your aunt?
She told me that we really need to work hard to get the story heard and to get Razan's message heard. Everyone needs to know the truth, and we need to work collectively to call for justice and to hold the responsible parties accountable for this war crime.
She said to you, "You are Razan now. Hold the torch and keep fighting." Dalia?
Yes. I broke down while talking to her, and she was calming me down, and she told me, now you're Razan. You guys used to play together all the time as young people, and I see you as Razan now, and I want you to continue her fight and to continue sharing her message to the world.
I understand that she was also injured on previous days as she worked as a medic in Gaza. One of our previous guests, Dr. Tarek Lubani, tweeted, she previously fainted twice due to gas inhalation, while on April 13th she broke her wrist after falling while running to attend to a wounded protester. I want to turn now to Dr. Medat Abbas, director of the Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in Gaza. Can you talk about Razan's commitment? Talk about what you understand happened to her on Friday. And was she taken to Shifa?
No, she was not taken to our hospital. She was taken to another hospital based in Rafah city. It's called the European Gaza Hospital. But in fact, she was shot by an explosive bullet that penetrated her heart and came out from her back. And the only thing she did was she pointed to something on her back, and then she fell on the ground, and then she died at once. And I mean, she was, as it's mentioned in this report, that she was clearing a white coat. It was clear to everybody that she's a paramedic, but that was a murder. I mean, that was a crime committed before cameras, and because the Israelis usually run with it, so they keep repeating that. I mean, another first rescuer was killed. He was called Musa Hassanin. The same way, also, he was shot dead while trying to rescue some of the victims among the protesters. And the same thing, they have been targeting some of the trauma stabilizing points that we have tents in the buffer zones. In those tents, we used to treat those victims of the Israeli aggression against our people, but at the same time, usually they target those tents by gas, by tear gas, and unfortunately, we gave the Israelis the GPS through the ICRC. But again, they are still insisting to target the medics and paramedics everywhere, wherever they are. And we will never, ever forget the war of the 2014, where they targeted complete hospitals. They demolished a hospital called Al-Wafa Hospital totally, and they attacked other 3 hospitals with partial destruction. I mean, so it's not the first time when they attacked medics and paramedics and health facilities.
So can we talk about what has taken place over the week since March 30th? March 30th to May 15th, the 6-week nonviolent protest called the Great March of Return. Up until now, are your figures 119 Palestinians dead and 13,000 wounded?
Yeah, 13,700 almost, and 123 today killed. In fact, before the March of Return, we've been living under a blockade for 10 years, more than a decade. And the poverty is prevailing, the unemployment is prevailing, and we've been suffering of shortage of medicine and restriction of movement of people across borders, because our borders are sealed most of the time. So it was a very miserable situation before the March of Return. After the March of Return started, then the people start to... we have never ever thought that the people would be targeted like that way. Well, just we thought they might use some tear gas, and that was the only thing we thought that may be used. But we were shocked by the large numbers of casualties arriving to our hospitals in serious condition. When the first day they killed almost 30 persons, and they wounded 1,500 or 1,700, and the numbers start to mount every week, and we reach now a tragedy. And in the health sector, on the other side, we've been suffering. Our staff are working without salaries. Most of the time, they're just taking some stipends, which are not enough to meet any of their financial needs. And because of, and we have shortage of electricity, shortage of maintenance and spare parts. Everything is quite difficult in our hospitals. And the total bed capacity that we have is 2,200 beds. Imagine that we have admitted 7,000 victims of this aggression in the last 2 months. So I remember Monday of the 14th of May, where we received 3,000 injured, and we lost almost 63 were killed that day, that the people were thrown in the ground in their blood. I mean, it was just a very miserable situation, that our capacity was full. In my hospital, where I have 14 operation rooms, all of them were operating along the hour, and the victims were thrown on the ground. We have no rooms to treat them. There was no way. Our triage tent that was expanded was full of them. And usually, because they use many kind of bullets, but there's a kind that they use which is called the explosive bullet, which will take out the bone and the blood vessels and leave nothing in the limb. They used to target the extremities, the lower limbs in particular. There is an artery called popliteal artery and another one called the femoral artery. Once they are targeted, the patient will arrive to the hospitals with hemorrhagic shock, and it will be very difficult to save their lives. And we have been existing too much effort to save the limbs of those people, but till now we lost 33 limbs were amputated during this aggression, and still they are not denying their intention to continue targeting the civilians at the border side. Of course, as it is quite clear that it is a violation of Geneva Convention, which will protect all the medical personnel in the fields, and it also protects the civilians everywhere during conflict times. But in fact, we are shocked, and we condemn by all the words what's being happening today. And believe me, we felt so sad by the United States backing them in the United Nations, where the only thing that was required is just to protect civilians. We're not requiring anything. The goal of this return march was just to break the siege. We need to be free. They are putting us in this country. We cannot travel. We have no salary. We have no hope. We have no electricity. We have nothing. And we want to be free like any other country in the world. Many of those people were children. Many of them were women. 2 women were killed since the beginning of the Great March of Return. And the only thing the people are requiring during those demonstrations are to break the siege and to return back to their homeland, which was stated clearly by the United Nations Resolution number 194.
Dr. Abbas, can you comment on whether you think medical personnel like Ghazan are being targeted? According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health and the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, 245 health workers and 40 ambulances have been targeted by Israeli security forces since the Great March of Return began on March 30th. Before you answer, I wanted to turn to Dr. Tarek Loubani. I interviewed him 2 weeks ago, the emergency room medical doctor, a Canadian-Palestinian doctor. He was one of 19 medical personnel at the time shot in Gaza. Dr. Loubani, an associate professor at Western University in London, Ontario. The medic who went to help him was shot dead an hour later. I asked Dr. Loubani if he felt he was targeted.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what orders they received or what was in their heads. So I can't tell you if we were deliberately targeted. What I can tell you is the things that I do know. In the 6 weeks of the march, there were no paramedic casualties. And in one day, 19 paramedics, 18 wounded plus 1 killed, and myself were all injured. Or were all shot with live ammunition. Musa was actually in a rescue at the time, but everybody else I've talked to was like me. We were away during a lull without smoke, without any chaos at all, and we were targeted, and we were rather hit by live ammunition, most of us in the lower limbs. So it's very, very hard to believe that the Israelis who shot me and the Israelis who shot my other colleagues, just from our medical crew, 4 of us were shot, including Musa Abu Hassanin, who passed away. It's very hard to believe that they didn't know who we were, they didn't know what we were doing, and that they were aiming at anything else.
So that was Dr. Tarek Loubani, who's back in Canada now. He is a Canadian emergency room doctor, shot in Gaza by an Israeli sniper. Again, the paramedic who helped him was then shot dead. Dr. Medet Abbas, do you feel medical personnel are being targeted?
Oh, sure. Sure, that cannot be denied, and I'm quite sure that this is goal-directed. It's an intention. They wanted to scare everybody so that nobody asks for his rights for freedom and his right to return back to his homeland. This is the problem. And scaring people like that way is a miserable act. It should be condemned by everybody in the international community. And we received support messages from many NGOs all over the world communicating with us, say that they offer their solidarity with us. But again, still the United States are still insisting to back Israel for what they do, killing civilians. We hope that the propaganda that we listen in the media is not right about that the people who are demonstrating are terrorists. No, they are not terrorists. They are unarmed civilians. The only thing they want is their freedom. They are trapped in the biggest prison, air-open prison in the world. Enough is enough. The people need their freedom, and that's our right, I think.
Dr. Mehmet Abbas, thousands came out for the funeral of Ghassan on Saturday. Can you describe what took place?
Well, just the people just wanted to express their anger, their condemnation of this act. And everybody, it was like a mass grief in Gaza Strip. Everybody cried for her and for the loss of the others, 123 persons who were killed. They were just doing nothing. They were just demonstrating peacefully. There was not a single Israeli soldier on the other side of the border who was wounded or harmed. Just nothing has happened to them. Why to use this excessive force against civilians? That's not explained, and everybody was condemning that. And the large number is saying that everybody is supporting the medical team, everybody is supporting the right of return, everybody is against the blockade which is imposed on us for more than a decade today. That was the meaning of this demonstration that occurred during the funeral of Ghassan Najjar.
Ghassan was shot on the same day that the United States vetoed the UN Security Council resolution on protection of Palestinians. Your comments, Dr. Abbas.
Well, I felt bad. Everybody, I was shocked really, because nothing, we have just wanted nothing. The only thing that we need protection for our children, for our women, for our dignity, for our life. We need our freedom. That's all. And we have expected the United States to support us, just not to die and to be free. But I don't know what happened. In fact, we cannot understand this, and we feel so bad for that.
Dalia Al-Najjar, speaking to us from Istanbul, Turkey, where you were co-founder of Xyla Water, where you're deeply dedicated to making clean water accessible around the world. Can you comment on the accessibility of clean water in Gaza?
Well, 97% of the water in Gaza are unfit for human consumption. So the water situation in Gaza is really horrible, and I'm exploring solutions and alternatives all the time to try to help. But it's impossible to do anything in Gaza without lifting the blockade and freeing the people and granting the freedom of movement and the people to be able to bring resources to build and to live normally. Actually, I haven't seen my family in 2 years, and it's really a tough time right now, and I can't be there with them. And so this is what we need to do. We need to, first of all, to lift the blockade, and then we will find solutions to everything else. Without lifting the blockade, it's really hard to navigate any solutions for all the problems and the crisis that Gaza is suffering from.
And your thoughts on Ghassan being killed the day that the U.S. vetoed the UN Security Council resolution on protection of Palestinians?
It's really disappointing. The whole world is watching one country of occupation bullying everyone else, and no one is doing anything. It's such a shameful, it's a shameful side that the United States decided to take, and it's really disappointing. And we wish that they would rethink this and would work toward justice, because peace will never emerge if we keep acting the way people act and the way the political leadership in the world acts. We need people to to seek for justice, and this is how peace will be built.
And finally, Dr. Medhat Abbas, have Israeli doctors, Israeli hospitals reached out to Shifa? Your hospital is the largest medical facility in Gaza during this time. The director of the International Committee of the Red Cross has said the violence since the Great March of Return has triggered a health crisis of unprecedented magnitude in this part of the world.
Yeah, it's a big magnitude, but well, the problem, as I mentioned, the capacity that we have in our hospital is very limited, and we cannot handle those mounting numbers every Friday. It's a disaster. And I mentioned that on the 14th of May, we were not able to handle most of the cases who were thrown on the ground because all the operation rooms were operating till next day morning, and we were not enough to meet the need of those bleeding victims outside. For that reason, we are still appealing, and thanks for the ICRC and WHO. They have been supporting us strongly during those events. But in fact, we have too much needs which are not yet met because of lack of donors and shortage of funds arriving to Gaza during this crisis. And it was mentioned, we were disappointed. We still need support. We still need our freedom. We still need medications, and we need these borders, the sealed border, to be opened for God's sake.
And have any Israeli hospitals or doctors reached out to you to help?
Well, no, not at all. But Palestinians from the West Bank have arrived. Jordan colleagues, they have arrived, also some vascular surgeons, but none of them have arrived to us, no.
I want to thank you both very much for being with us. Dr. Medhat Abbas, director of the Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, the largest medical facility there, and Dalia Al-Najjar, Razan's cousin, co-founder of Zyla Water, an organization dedicated to making clean water accessible around the world. We will end with the last photograph of Razan, a photo moments before she was killed. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go south in the United States to Atlanta, Georgia, to speak with the Democratic candidate for governor of Georgia. If she wins in November, she will become the first African-American woman governor in U.S. history. We'll be speaking with Stacey Abrams. Stay with us. Clouds, Teardrops by Terez Yazan and Friends. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn now to, well, the record 42 women running for 19 seats in the Senate. Currently, there are 23 women senators. Beyond the Senate, victories for female candidates in Democratic races have become a trend since the primary season began March 6, prompting some to predict 2018 election will be a major year for Democratic women. Before this year, the last major boom in female nominees was 1992, after the 1991 Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas. So many women were elected to the Senate Senate in '92 that analysts called it the Year of the Woman. Well, today we're going to look at one of the most exciting races for governor. It's in Georgia, where the former State House Democratic leader, Stacey Abrams, made history weeks ago by becoming the first African-American woman to win a major party's nomination for governor in U.S. history. She defeated Stacey Evans, a former state representative who ran as a centrist. If Abrams wins in November, she'll become the first African-American governor in the Deep South since Reconstruction. Abrams is the former House Minority Leader for the Georgia General Assembly. She received the endorsement of numerous progressive organizations, including Our Revolution, the political group that grew out of Bernie Sanders' run for the White House. Stacey Abrams addressed her supporters at night on May 23rd.
Must remember that we're in the state where the red clay gives life to generations of dreamers. A state where when Martin marched on ballot boxes and challenged a nation's conscience. A Georgia that gave us the godfather of soul, the queen of the Met, and sent a peanut farmer to the Oval Office.
That was Stacey Abrams on her primary victory night. This November, she faces a tough race against her Republican opponent who hasn't been decided yet. He'll be decided on in a July 24th runoff. It's between Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle and Secretary of State Brian Kemp. To talk more about this and much more, Stacey Abrams joins us from Atlanta. In addition to running for governor, she's won national recognition for her work to register 200,000 people to vote, including voters of color in Georgia. She's the 2012 recipient of the John F. Kennedy New Frontier Award, spoke at the 2016 Democratic National Convention, and has been hailed by the New York Times as one of its 14 young Democrats to watch. And she has written a new book. It's called Minority Leader: How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change. Stacey Abrams, welcome back to Democracy Now! We interviewed you in 2014, around the 200,000 people that you helped to register to vote. We're asking you right now your feeling that night in May when you won, making history in Georgia, when you won the Democratic nomination for governor.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for having me back. And it was an extraordinary night, not just for me and what it symbolized for women and women of color, but what it symbolizes for Georgia and for America. We're changing the face of leadership in this country. And that means reflecting the very different experiences and lives that folks have, but recognizing that that change is a good thing for Georgia and a good thing for America.
Talk about the issues you ran on.
I'm running on very clear progressive values, democratic values. We talk about educating children from cradle to career, and that's something that resonated across the state of Georgia. We talk about a diverse and inclusive economy that works for every Georgian, no matter where you live. There's a woman I met in Macon. Her name was Pam, and she had 2 daughters, one of whom was about to give birth. She was sending her daughters off to college, getting ready to raise her grandchild because she knew that college degree was one of the best guarantees for her daughter. But when I asked her what she wanted for herself, she didn't really know. She'd been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years, and no one had ever asked her what she wanted. And it turns out she wants to start a daycare center so that she can not only take care of her grandchild, but help other young women who are forced to make terrible choices about whether they can pursue their dreams. And she wanted to be able to take care of those kids too, but didn't think anyone would invest in her. I want to be the governor who invests in Pam and Pam Inc. And the third issue we talk about is having proven leadership that makes certain that the state works for everyone. And that means expanding Medicaid, doing in Georgia what Virginia was able to do last week. But it's also talking about criminal justice reform, continuing the good work that's been done here, but also thinking about how do we deal with issues of transit and transportation, the environment, really making certain that government works for everyone. Those are the issues we talked about, and it resounded across the state of Georgia, from rural parts to urban parts and across every racial demographic.
You know, we talked to you in 2014. You were our guest, along with Ben Jealous, at the time head of the NAACP. He now is running for the Democratic nomination of governor in Maryland. And you were talking about the 200,000 people that you had helped to register to vote. Can you talk about this? Clearly in November, turnout is going to be key. In fact, during the primaries, more Republicans turned out than Democrats. Did this concern you? And how many people overall in Georgia simply don't vote?
So we're excited about what the primary results showed, because while more Republicans voted than Democrats, Democrats had historic turnout. 65% more Democrats turned out for this primary than turned out 4 years ago. And Republicans actually lost ground. They had fewer folks voting than they did in 2014. So that's an incredibly, I think, encouraging sign for us. But writ large, the work that we did with the New Georgia Project, which continues now as an independent organization separate from me, is that we have to increase the franchise for everyone. No one should lose their right to vote, but also everyone should embrace the fact that they have that right. And that's what the New Georgia Project has done and will continue to do. But I'll tell you this. We have enough voters who share those values of education, of economic security, of really strong and effective leadership. We have enough voters in Georgia to win this election. Because it goes to the last point you made. It's not just about whether you're registered, although that is critical, and we will continue to make certain that is top of mind, that voter suppression doesn't win the day. But it's also about having values that voters want to voice. And what our campaign has been grounded in is engaging people so that they know that if they vote in this election, change will come, that their voices matter. I built a campaign that's been very different from a lot of campaigns that preceded me. Rather than spending a lot of money trying to convert Republicans into Democrats, I'm spending the bulk of our resources encouraging voters who share our values, Democratic-leaning voters and independent thinkers, so that they know that if they vote, they actually will get a different result. Because what's really happened is that the unheard and unseen have given up. And I believe that with the right candidate and the right message and the right investment, we can turn them into active voters.
So this number, you face this November a tough race against one of the Republicans who is running in the Republican primary. Their runoff is July 24th. And I want to play excerpts from their campaign ads. This is Secretary of State Brian Kemp.
I'm Brian Kemp. I'm so conservative. I blow up government spending. I own guns that no one's taking away. My chainsaw's ready to rip up some regulations. I got a big truck, just in case I need to round up criminal illegals and take them home myself. Yep, I just said that. I'm Brian Kemp. If you want a politically incorrect conservative, that's me.
That was Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who faces the runoff with Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. This is the ad by Cagle.
We've got the deportation bus. That's right, you heard me. The Michael Williams deportation bus. If you want to find out where we're coming, go to deportationbus.com. We're going to implement my 287G deportation plan that's going to fill this bus with illegals to send them back to where they came from.
So that's Lieutenant Governor Cagle. He's running against Kemp in the runoff. Now, Kemp is the man that you were dealing with as Secretary of State in the midst of the governor's race in Georgia between Nathan Deal and Jason Carter. That year, Secretary of State Brian Kemp accused your group, the New Georgia Project, of voter registration fraud, but an investigation found just something like 51 potential forgeries out of 80,000 applications the group submitted, and the group was the one that brought attention to these when going through those signatures. In September 2014, audio was released of Kemp warning fellow Republicans that Democrats might win because they're registering minority voters. The audio was released by Better Georgia and features Kemp speaking at a July 12, 2014 event in Gwinnett County. This is a clip.
To get through this runoff, the Democrats are working hard. There's been all these stories about them, registering all these minority voters that are out there and others that are sitting on the sidelines, and if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
Can you talk about each of these possible opponents in the governor's race, beginning with who we just listened to, which was the man who you took on in 2014, Secretary of State Kemp?
I will say this about both Secretary Kemp and Lieutenant Governor Cagle. Secretary Kemp has unfortunately built a very strong record of voter suppression. And yes, he and I we've conflicted a number of times. And I think I know I'm very proud of our record of beating him, of forcing him to restore the canceled registrations of thousands, of compelling his office to do the right thing when it comes to voter registration. But also, I think it's a challenging conversation to have both with Secretary Kemp and with Lieutenant Governor Cagle, because rather than focusing on how we move the state forward, they have both focused, unfortunately, on this quieter form of bigotry, of how they want to harm communities and hold us back. I will correct one thing, that the commercial played about the deportation bus was actually another Republican candidate who lost. But Casey Cagle, unfortunately, has echoed those sentiments of treating those immigrant communities as less than in the state of Georgia, of trying to harm the LGBTQ community in Georgia. But I'm running a positive campaign where we talk about what we can accomplish together. And that's the reason I ran the New Georgia Project. It's the reason, actually, I wrote the Minority Leader book, because I want us to understand that those who are on the sidelines, those who find their voices muted or find their voices actually silenced, have power. And there is no more profound power in a democracy than the power to vote. And so my mission, both as a candidate and a writer, is to talk to folks about how we own that power, how we hack the opportunity to really take control of our government back. Because we have so many opportunities, not only in Georgia, but nationwide. And I know that in the state of Georgia, if we invest in our voters and if we lift up our values, we can win. What we've seen happen in the last few election cycles, unfortunately, was a disproportionate investment in trying to convince Republicans to vote Democratic. What we are focused on is a people-powered campaign where we own the franchise and where we say, if we value our voters and if we're willing to go to every corner of the state and talk to every single person, we can actually win elections without having to cater to these right-wing, harshly conservative policies that only serve to harm everyone.
Lieutenant Governor Cagle is the politician who threatened Delta Airlines, whose home base is in Atlanta. I just was in Atlanta on Saturday speaking to a Delta flight attendant. He threatened to end tax exemption for Delta because they stopped giving any kind of discount for NRA members. Is that right?
That's correct. He actually was successful. He stripped the language from a bill, and he took away that jet fuel tax exemption that was proposed. But here's the thing. I am proud to say that I have never gotten better than a D or an F from the NRA. It's the only bad grades my parents have ever been proud of, because I will always stand on the side of gun safety. And this is someone who understands those who want to own weapons. I come from a family that hunted. I know how to hunt, but I don't do it. But I get to make that choice. But I also understand that the higher responsibility that every person who uses a firearm has is the responsibility for gun safety. And I see absolutely no conflict between being a gun safety advocate who's been endorsed by Gabrielle Giffords and believing that you can have a Second Amendment. And that, again, is a contrast that I have with both of my opponents. I'm not going to fearmonger to win an election. I'm going to focus on the positive opportunities we have for a bright future for all of our families, where everyone has the freedom and opportunity to thrive. And that's really why I'm running. It's why I've been doing the work I've been doing for the last 18 years, because I believe that we can do better by our people.
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion. Our guest is Stacey Abrams, Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia, made history in May by becoming the first African-American woman to win a major party nomination for governor in the United States. This is Democracy Now! Back with her in a moment.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you. Comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pine.
Georgia on My Mind by Ray Charles. This is Democracy Now! Our guest, Stacey Abrams, Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia, made history by becoming the first African-American woman to win a major party's nomination for governor in the United States. If she wins in November, she'll become the first African-American governor in the Deep South since Reconstruction, the first African-American woman governor anywhere in the United States. She served 7 years as the Democratic leader in the Georgia General Assembly. Her new book, titled Minority Leader: How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change. In a short graphic novel about your life called Walk Together, it tells the story of how in 1991 you were denied entrance to the Georgia governor's mansion at first, when you went there along with other high school valedictorians who'd been invited. Now, if you win, you may be a little closer to calling the mansion home. Talk about what happened then.
In 1991, I was a high school senior. I graduated as valedictorian. But my parents, who are incredible people, at the time they were graduate students at Emory University getting their Masters of Divinity, we didn't have a car. My family couldn't afford one. And so we relied on public transit. That day, we took the public bus to the governor's mansion. We got off the bus and we walked up the driveway. All the other families were arriving by car. And the security guard looked at my parents, looked at me, and refused us entry. He told us we didn't belong. He didn't ask to see our invitation. He didn't check his checklist. Luckily, I have very aggressive parents who believe in their children and will always stand up for us. And so they had a very vigorous and engaged discussion with the guard, and he finally agreed to check the checklist and found my name on it. And the point of the story is I was allowed inside, but I don't remember meeting the governor of Georgia. I don't remember meeting my fellow valedictorians. What stuck with me from that day was this man standing in front of the most powerful place in Georgia telling me I didn't have the right to come inside because of who he saw when he looked at me, when he looked at that bus that my parents and I got off of. My mission in this race, my mission in the way I've lived my life is to make certain that we create space for everyone to belong. That when we walk together, when we have good leadership that sees all of Georgia, that no one will ever feel that they are not a part of our history and also a part of our future. And that's been, for me, the most important piece of that story, not the narrative that some may have extracted from it about how I was left behind, but more about the opportunity to go inside and change what it means to be the governor in Georgia, to be a governor in the Deep South.
Stacey Abrams, among those who have endorsed you is Our Revolution, the outgrowth of the organization that of Bernie Sanders. What does that endorsement mean to you?
I was privileged to be endorsed by Our Revolution, to be endorsed by Senator Sanders, but to also be endorsed by Hillary Clinton. And for me, it's a function of bringing together every faction and every part of the Democratic Party. Valerie Jarrett came down, the former senior advisor to President Obama, came down the Saturday before the election. My campaign is grounded in the notion that we can bring everyone together to win, because our opponent is not the Republicans. Our opponent is the inaction. Our opponent is the lack of educational opportunity for every child. Our opponent is making certain that economic opportunity isn't relegated to the privileged, that we have to fight back against those who would deny us access to health care. And so I'm excited to have everyone at the table with me, from Our Revolution to Secretary Clinton to Valerie Jarrett, because what it signals is a broader understanding that Democrats and democratic values are the only way for progress in America.
Stacey Abrams, I'd like to ask you to stay so we can do a post-show interview, and we'll post online under Web Exclusive. Stacey Abrams is Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia. Her new book, Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Accepting applications for our paid video production fellowships. Go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.